Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of love songs. This one kind of surprises me though. I guess Sufjan has quite a few songs that are about romance and love in general, but the title of this one is not something I would expect that theme to crop up in. It's called The Predatory The Predatory Wasp of the Palisades is Out to Get Us. What? Okay. Let's dive into this and listen to a song about a wasp. A predatory one, at that. Quite a bit more gentle than I expect from the title, too.
Thinking outrageously,
that gentle woodwind sound to bring it in. His vocals capture a lot of that same feeling. The general airiness of the delivery, the small sounds making it very vulnerable.
Oh, I am not quite sleeping. Oh, I am fast in bed. They're on the wall in the bedroom creeping. I see a wasp with her wings outstretched.
The piano is still retaining a lot of that beautiful harmony underneath, but this is kind of dissonant. It's harmonically tense, I think, is the way I want to put that. It's also just kind of noisy in general. It feels distinct both from where we came from and from the piano line that exists. Oh, it's getting louder?
North of Savannah, we swim in the Palisades. I come out wearing my brother's red hat. There on his shoulder, my best friend is bit 7 times. He runs washing his face in his hand.
That jump up to 7 times into the falsetto. I like that movement.
Touching his back with my hand, I kiss him. I see the wasp on the length of my arm.
So we have the same 2 instruments from earlier, but they're being less disruptive this time around. Very minimal percussion instruments in here, but plenty of rhythmic devices. The bell mix is very playful.
My best friend into the car from the back seat. Oh, admiration in falling asleep. All of my powers, day after day. I can tell you We swaggered and swayed deep in the tower, the prairies below. I could tell you, but telling it's old. Terrible state.
I was gonna say we had 3 vocal lines, now we're up to 4? 5 maybe, I think there's layering over here.
I can tell you, I love him each day. Though we have sparred, wrestled and raged, I can tell you, I love him each day. Terrible state.
That piano line is interesting. It bounces between. It has a moving idea. Do 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 do. But instead of starting on the downbeat every single time, it changes. Alright, that probably goes into the next track, right? Alright. Alright. This song is interesting to me. It exists in 2 forms. Now, the first form I think we're all going to be able to agree on. The second form might be subjective. I'll be interested to hear if anybody understands this track differently than I do. Primarily because of this one section. But I'm going to start with the first part that I think we can all agree on. This track starts off and frequently returns to exceptionally beautiful writing. I mean, right there at the beginning. Very light, very gentle, very comfortable sound atmospherically, even harmonically. We have a woodwind, and I could not get I couldn't figure out what it was. It kind of had a very wooden sound to it. So I was kind of leaning towards something in the clarinet family, possibly, maybe a recorder even. But the amount of airiness in it made me think of flute instead. But it didn't have enough presence to it. It was played right on the cusp, that threshold between just air passing through the instrument and creating a musical tone. And that, I think, is really important. I don't know what it represents yet, but it definitely showcases an instrument that is just barely able to voice itself. And I thought that's very cool. That doesn't show up very often. Usually there is a proper amount of airflow and air pressure through an instrument to maintain a sound. Even if you're trying to play quiet, there's still going to be that proper air support underneath the tone. And here we don't really get that. In some places, it almost sounds like pure air rather than the pitched sound that the instrument is, known for. Most people don't play an aerophone instrument, whether it's a woodwind or a brass instrument or whatever, and just push air through it. You're usually wanting to create tones and melodies and music out of it. And this just kind of really hovering right around that threshold of making tone and just having air being blown through. It's an interesting sound. I like it from an artistic area. This idea of barely finding the voice of the instrument. And like I mentioned, right after this instrument doesn't stick around for too long, maybe 10 seconds tops. The vocals come in for the first verse, I think, and they are very similar, very airy, very breathy, and very quiet, retaining many of the same characteristics of that woodwind tone, just as a voice, a human tone with words tied to it. There's a lot of vulnerability right here at the beginning of the track that is wrapped in this warm, comfortable, bright tone. It feels very joyous in a way, but not that overblown, victory, pride kind of like a parade, right? That very overdone type of joy and happiness. This feels a bit more muted, as if it's like a warmth coming from within, if that makes sense. This dictates many times that we return back to what I'm going to deem a verse, even though I don't think that's completely accurate, primarily because, at least musically, the verse has differing compositional components. If these are all verses, the first verse and the second verse, and I think the third verse, don't really have a lot of exact rhythmic or melodic ideas copy pasted, right? In which case, it'd probably be better just to call it like section A and then section C and then section D, because B is our chorus, and there is a part in this that is musically and I think lyrically repeated over and over. That is definitely the chorus part of the song. Everything else is semi-linear, though, as far as the music is concerned. But we tend to return back to this sort of quieter, soft-spoken vocal style, singular, which I think is important too, differentiated from the multi-layered vocal parts, which I call the chorus. Um, but yeah, the chorus, I mean, the verses are always a bit quieter, a little timid, maybe even might be the word. I don't know. Vulnerable, I think, is really the best way to describe them. But these sections are always beautiful, no matter what else is going on, what's actually being composed up in these sections. Beauty, I think, is the overarching element of all of the verses. I love these moments. I do. They bring a smile to my face, and they just feel very comfortable. I think that's a good word for it. Not too overbearing. Again, the joy is more of a withheld kind of joy. It's just very warm and comfortable. But then that takes us to the chorus. This is a mixed bag for me. Much like the verse, this does change over time. We have some horns coming in here, and eventually we have vocals coming in here. We have more horn parts. I think a trumpet that sits above everything on the third time through. And like I said, just like with the verse, every time we come back to it, more layers. But the foundation doesn't change. This is different from the verse, which I feel the verse has a new foundation and new melodic ideas every time we return to it. The chorus is just building up. We start off with layer 1, and then the next time we hit it, it's layer 1 and layer 2, and then layer 2 and layer 3, and we just increase the depth of it. Almost as if we're seeing an unrealized version the first time through, and as we return to this chorus, we eventually fill out the space until we have the fully realized version of it by the end of the track. Um, I'm not too sure about this one, and like I said, I think this is where we might be a bit divisive, in my opinion, versus yours. That's why I'm looking forward to the comments. I found, particularly during this first chorus, I found it to be alarming. Word feels a bit on the nose because I do think that the horns kind of sound like an alarm at times. It's it's not dissonant, but it isn't necessarily harmonically consonant either. There is a ton of tension in the harmony here, both in the underlying piano part versus the horns, but even the horns themselves, I feel like the tone, the timbre, I should say, of the horns, the specific sound of the instruments more so than what notes they're playing, also comes across as a bit sharp and abrasive too. It is a section that I did not really enjoy the first time through, and I felt that it was an exceptionally strong contrast to that very warm, inviting verse that we had. The fact that it continued to exist for such a long time really took me out of the experience. Whereas the first part of the song, I was like, oh, this is so good. I could listen to this forever. This part comes in and I'm just like, when are we moving on? Is this what the rest of the song is? I don't want to be here. I don't enjoy this. Something is wrong. This idea softened up over time, though. I think part of it is production. As we add more layers, the second time that we come to this, we have vocals. Yeah, I think that's accurate. There might have been a single vocal layer the first time through. I might be forgetting that. But after this, we go back to the verse and then we come back to this noisy horn stuff. But there's vocals to go along with it this time. The piano has been removed in place of some light percussion. And then we have center vocal stuff, we have panned vocal stuff, and the third time through, there's even more vocal lines. I think I counted 5 tops. Might be a little more though. And we have some expanded percussion. Once we introduce all of these other elements, oh, plus that final time through, we also had a horn that was like above the song, a little bit to the right. It was a trumpet, giving us another layer of melody against all of the intricate vocal lines going on here. Once we start incorporating all of this, that noisy alarm stuff that's going off on the sides kind of gets suppressed. It gets tucked into the mix where it's not as loud anymore. It kind of works. I still think that those feelings of something's wrong, of an alarm ringing, are still kind of active, but they're being overpowered by everything else. And there's even a point where I think it kind of works into all of the beautiful harmony going on, and it kind of sounds more like, I don't know if you all are familiar with like handbells, um, where each hand, like it's differently shaped bells, and you pick them up and you hit them, and each bell has a specific note, and you usually need a handful of people, somewhere between like 5 and 12, in order to play more complex stuff, because you only play 2 notes per person, one per hand. I mean, you could put a bell down and stuff, but these tend to be very metallic, sometimes shrill tones. Um, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that goes into the shaping of the bells and maybe even the material in order to soften this up a little bit. And where I'm going with this, though, is that I've heard handbell performances where the instruments are just too shrill for me. They're too abrasive of a tone. The music is solid. I love what's being played. I just can't listen to these bells. And sometimes it's even distance. Being further away kind of allows the timbres to soften up a little bit before they hit my ears. But I've also heard some performances where the bells just sound absolutely smooth and angelic. So that's almost what happens here. What feels like alarms after we diminish the volume a little bit, and maybe there's some other production stuff, kind of feels like it elevates the song by the end. They sound like they're joining into the positive creative force that all of the vocal lines are. And I came around to, at times, towards the end of the track, enjoy this sort of alternating horn stuff on the sides of the song that worked alongside all the vocal tracks. But I I'd wager if I put this song on again and we get those isolated horns in that first chorus, I'm not going to enjoy that. It is definitely not that I acclimated to the sound, but it's that the production of those instruments were changed over the course of the track to soften their aggression, to shave off the round edges, or shave off the harsh edges and round them off. It's an interesting evolution to take an idea like that. It makes, I'd say, about half of the song a bit unpalatable for me. It does end up going somewhere that I quite enjoy, but it does leave me with moments of the track that I don't really want to revisit. It makes me think that there's an artistic reasoning behind that, and Sufjan is pretty good about artistically incorporating themes into his music, but as a casual listener, I can't say I enjoyed that first bit. Not something I want to revisit. And this kind of takes me to the last topic that I think is really a key part of this, which is the vocal layers. As we get towards the end of the song, these become more and more layered. We get more of them, and the ways that they work alongside each other. Like I mentioned there at the end, we had very minimal percussion. We had a quick, I don't know, 5 or 7 hits really quick, like 16th notes, and then a bunch of pause, and then there was a more drawn out, maybe like 3 hits, like bop, 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 something a bit on the slower side, and then a pause, and then back to that really quick group of 16th notes. And that's really it. Those two phrases with plenty of space between them. But despite not having a lot of percussion instruments here, there's a lot of rhythmic devices going on. When you listen to each individual vocal line, you're going to find a lot of rhythmic ideas in there. And of course, once we overlay all of these different vocal lines and all of their different rhythmic ideas, you're going to create something that is very rhythmic and syncopated and complex and honestly a little groovy. For all of the overlaid rhythmic ideas, it's still very easy to find a general groove to this and sort of move your body a little bit. I wouldn't say that this is dance music, certainly not headbanging music, but it's something that you kind of want to move to a little still. And I appreciate that. I find body movement to be a key part of listening to music and enjoying music. And when I can't find that, I think it sort of makes my enjoyment more difficult, even though it has nothing to do with the musical side of things. It's, I think, one of the things that makes it difficult for me to get into more experimental and avant-garde things, at least rhythmically. If you are playing some experimental harmonic ideas, but there's still a solid groove to it, I think I'm more willing to acclimate to that on like a subconscious level, simply because there is that rhythmic component there. Um, Or it's like, oh yeah. There's still a little bit of groove in there. But what I find most interesting here is when we listen to all of these voices, the complexity of it all. We kind of take it all in on the harmonic level. What kind of chords? What's the emotion? What's the atmosphere of this section? And it almost feels like a choir. I don't know if anybody else gets this. It was kind of a. I didn't mean to bring this up. I had mentioned handbells at times feeling angelic, but I do think that there is something of awe in the ending here. I don't know if angelic is necessarily the word I would use for all the vocal lines, but the harmonies that they create is definitely something that feels larger than life, and it does feel very awesome, very positive. Kind of brings some of that understated joy from the beginning of the song and turns it outward and overstates it. And it feels like what was once a warm feeling that sat in the core is now something that is exuding through every pore. It's exceptionally overstated. It's impossible, I think, to listen to this and not feel the energy shift that we've had from the first moment of this track to this final moment. There's also a piano line in here that I find interesting, but aside from that, and the trumpet that is giving us some melody lines, although tucked in a little bit into the mix, the vocals definitely have prominence here. The vocals, I think, are the showcase. They're definitely the harmonic showcase, but I think also a bit of the melodic showcase, even though I think listening to individual voices is going to be a bit more difficult. The way that they combine, to me, feels more chordal based because of all the noise between all the moving parts. But I do think that it is what's in the spotlight here. And I think it's what people are going to be paying the most attention to, is the way that all these voices come together to create this atmosphere, this overwhelming feeling. Now, I mentioned that piano there. I don't know what to say about it. Like I mentioned, it kind of runs up and runs down in these packs of two. So it'd be like do 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 do, and I'm pretty sure that the runs up and the runs down are identical on both times through. So whatever notes are picked for the first run up, we play them identically the second time, and the same goes for the run down. Whatever notes are picked are played both times identically. What does change though is where the run itself starts. The first one, I think, the first run up is on a downbeat, so it starts on one maybe. I wasn't paying attention to the timing, but the next one doesn't. The way that I just sung those, I mean the pitches are wrong, but the rhythm is wrong too, because I begin both of those on downbeats. It's what feels the most natural. Sufjan doesn't. The first one starts on a downbeat, but the other one starts, I think, a half of a beat after I expect it. And I never got the timing right for the first downward run. It always felt later than I expected, and because I couldn't time that one, the second rundown also escaped my grasp. I never quite understood what the timing was on that either. And the whole thing ends up feeling, like I said, unnatural in ways. This is a very common idea. Of having this rhythmic, almost an echo of a run up to a run down. And the way that I sing it not only feels natural to me because we have things starting on downbeats, but also because I've heard this pattern in songs before. And Sufjan decides to subvert that and specifically push things half of a beat, or maybe even at times a whole beat, past where the expected area would be for the idea to start. It creates something that feels a little confused, or even maybe confusing, at least to me as a listener. But again, it also feels unnatural, but also interesting. It made me pay a lot of attention to it. It's in a sense, right? It's two 4-note runs on the piano. It really is not remarkable at all. It is this ornamental idea that even in the mix isn't given a lot of spotlight. You really have to be listening for it. And despite that, I looked past all of these vocal layers, all the rhythmic ideas, the lead trumpet melody, freaking trumpet. I never looked past the trumpet to see what this piano's doing down here because I was so perplexed by it. It captured my imagination, I suppose, in a way. Everything else kind of fits. The horns on the side, like I mentioned, they're still a little noisy, but they've begun to work within the grander scheme of things. The vocal harmonies, I mean, we've already heard those a couple of times, but it's definitely what I expect from this more joyous kind of choir sound. And then the piano comes in and just goes against the grain in a way that's still beautiful. It immediately called my attention to it. I noticed it probably the second time through. It probably caught my ear the first time through, and I was like, "Hey, wait, what's going on down there?" And I have to wait for the loop itself to start over so I can catch it from the beginning and try to understand it. And after a few times, I was like, I don't get this. There's other things going on. I got to pay attention to that. But I mean, it just grabbed my attention so quickly, and I had no way to categorize it in something that I would understand. It just, like I said, it escaped my understanding, and I had to comment on that immediately. Yeah. I think it was the first thing I said when the song ended. I don't have anything to say about the actual ending of the song, the final 20 seconds or so. I assume that that's a transition into the next track, more so than something to deal with this one. If y'all want to correct me on that, go for it. But as far as the analysis segment's concerned, I'm going to disregard it. Which is going to take us into lyrics. Alright, so we actually have a little bit of a frame story on this. You don't see this too often in songs simply because for a 5-minute track even, but especially for the 3-minute songs that a lot of mainstream music goes for, you just don't have a lot of time lyrically to set up a frame story. And that's basically where you begin with one story and then move into another. This is by way of flashback. It says one night he's hiding in his bed with the lights on the floor. Not really sure what that means. but it does paint an evocative picture. I'm picturing some sort of like old timey desk lamp, something that you'd probably see in the 90s, on the floor, sort of shining upwards towards the bed. He says that he's thinking outrageously and writing in cursive, wearing 3 layers of coats and leg warmers. I see my own breath on the face of the door. At best, it's just kind of setting up this being a cold winter evening, but maybe there's something metaphorical to it all that I'm missing. It says not quite asleep, but am fast in bed. There on the wall in the bedroom creeping, I see a wasp with her wings outstretched. That's the frame story. He sees a wasp and it triggers this memory. Now, I was very lost on this. It took me a couple read throughs to figure out what was going on with these first 2 stanzas and the rest of the song. And even then, I only had a small connection going. It really was thanks to the annotations on this that sets it up as a frame story that in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But without like the do 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 the flashback music that's used in like 90s TV shows, it just wasn't clicking for me. And like I said, it's so rare to see in music because honestly, it doesn't really add much to this song, but it does add a little bit, and that little bit actually ends up feeling pretty cool. So I'm glad that you went that direction. Could have just went straight into the flashback, and I think it would have been okay. Um, but then we have the rest of this track. There's a lot of repetition, and this I think is the layered vocals that we have in the chorus. It takes up a vast percentage of this lyrics, and it just says, "We were in love, the Palisades, I can wait." There's a couple of new, well, there's this one line that ends the stanza. It says, trusting things beyond mistake. Other times it says, Lamb of God, we sound the horn. Onto us, your ghost is born. There's a lot of biblical religious imagery going on. But for the most part, there is some religious line at the end of this, and then hallelujah. And it's interrupted, apparently. I don't remember hearing this in the song, but the lyrics always cut it off with a hyphen. Like I said, this stanza makes up so much of this song. The beginning of it, though, the first verse, talks about being in north of Savannah, we swim in the Palisades. I come out wearing my brother's red hat, and there on his shoulder my best friend is bit 7 times. He runs washing his face in his hands. It says, I meant to tease him, and I meant no harm. I touched his back with my hand, and I kissed him, and I see the wasp on the length of my arm. This is interesting. It basically sets this to be some sort of getaway of some sort. Just, a trip to go swimming is kind of how I see it. Although it could also be some sort of camp, maybe. I'm not too sure. Regardless, he comes out of the water and it says that his best friend is bitten 7 times. This, I think, is a metaphor for being struck by Cupid. And he runs to the bathroom, I think, to get away from this. Maybe he's blushing or something. And the thing here is he rushes to wash his face in his hands, it says. Again, cleaning off the face. So maybe blushing is what's going on there. And it says that our narrator goes in after him. Meant to tease him. I just didn't mean any harm, but ended up kissing him. This, I believe, is a song about an awakening. Maybe of these 2 people, maybe just of the narrator's sexuality. I never quite understood what was up with the wasp on the length of the arm or the idea of being bitten 7 times. But the Genius Annotator community has used it, or has viewed it as a metaphor for danger. And this is something I would never have come at, and it explains a lot of the religious imagery and religious lines in here too. And I think y'all have explained this to me a couple times on past Sufjan songs, but it's just something that hasn't clicked with me. is that Sufjan was either brought up very religious or still is very religious. I don't remember. And if you are having a sexual awakening after being told that being gay is evil, there could definitely be a schism here between what you're feeling and what you're told you should be feeling. And apparently that's what the wasp is supposed to represent. Or at least I should say how people feel the wasp is represented. And so that does bring us to the chorus that we were in love in the Palisades. Over and over and over, just this joyous feeling. Now, I do think it's interesting then that the first time we hear the horns, to me, feels like an alarm. It might be that schism, feeling feelings that you're told you shouldn't feel, and sort of associating these with danger, with sin, possibly. And having that paired against this warm positivity that we see in the verse, and trying to figure out where the truth lies between these two extremes, how I'm feeling right now, and wanting to chase this and being told that this is wrong. Ooh. Okay, that actually. So I mentioned that the horns sort of become less abrasive as the song progresses, but lyrically we explain that these two people, the narrator and his best friend, who they've caught feelings for each other, that they continue to have these feelings for each other. Um, it could be that as they continue to explore this relationship, those feelings of guilt or shame or sin or whatever become less prominent. And so the alarm of the horns becomes less prominent in the mix. At least that's my interpretation of it. I could be way off on that. By the end of the song, though, to me it seems like they've begun to distance themselves. It says, "My friend is gone, he ran away. I can tell you though I loved him every day. Even though we sparred and wrestled and raged, I can tell you I love him each day." Something came between them. Maybe it was the relationship itself. Doesn't really go into that as far as I can tell. Um, but this does seem to be what the song is about. Maybe not necessarily a sexual awakening, but maybe just one of the earliest memories that our narrator has of exploring this sexuality of theirs. So, bringing that all into the music, yeah, it makes sense for this song to be warm and inviting and joyous, and even by the end, very exuding joy rather than a warmth within, but also pairing it with some more, at least to me, negative sounds. And I do wonder how everyone else interprets that, because, if you listen to that first chorus and you're like, yeah, no, the horns sound fine to me, my entire read of this is very different than yours. So, like I said, I'm double interested now. Originally, it was just the musicality of it, but even when we bring in the lyrics, I think it'd be interesting to see how people read this if they don't hear the horns as abrasive as I did. Those are my thoughts. The Predatory Wasp of the Palisades is out to get us by Sufjan Stevens. What do you think, though? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Put all of that, as well as any other thoughts you have, into the comment section of this video. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for this one. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.